I could also ask Reverend Turner to offer the opening gasho.
Yes, please join me in gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Naman Butsu. Naman Butsu. Naman Butsu.
Thank you, Sensei. So for our Paul Ohigan seminar, let me introduce our speaker, Reverend Henry Torio Adams, grew up in Buffalo, Minnesota. He discovered his interest in Buddhism during a one-year high school exchange program in Chennai, India. As an undergraduate student at St. Olaf College, he began his study of Buddhist scriptures and first considered pursuing the path of the ministry. After receiving an MA in Buddhist studies from the University of Michigan, he moved to Miyazaki, Japan, where he worked for the prefectural government. In 2007, Reverend Adams moved to Kyoto to pursue his ministerial studies at the Chuo Bukkyo Gakuin Buddhist Seminary. Upon graduating from there in 2010, he began serving as a minister in the Buddhist Churches of America, initially at the Oxnard Buddhist Temple. He has been serving in his current capacity as the resident minister of the San Mateo Buddhist Temple since 2013, and as supervising minister for the Buddhist Church of San Francisco since 2020. We are very grateful to Reverend Adams for agreeing to be our seminar speaker today. Sensei, onegai shimasu.
Onegai shimasu. Great. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you on Zoom. If you want to switch on your cameras, I welcome you to, but if you prefer not to, that's fine too. Thank you very much, Jim, for your kind introduction. I'm very grateful to Reverend Turner and Reverend Wandra for their kind invitation to be with you for this Ohigan seminar. We're able to gather in this virtual format. It's safe for everyone, and hopefully you're all doing well and staying healthy. It's great to be sort of reconnected with my friends at OCBC, to get to see some of you here on Zoom. So today I'll be talking a little bit about the Contemplation Sutra, and I'll be talking a little bit about also, what is the sutra, and where does the Contemplation Sutra fit into the collection of the Buddhist teachings. But before I start my presentation in earnest, I thought I would ask if folks had any questions or any sort of thoughts on your mind, things that you're bringing to this seminar, things you'd like to know more about today. And it can be specifically about Contemplation Sutra or today's topic, or it could be kind of general questions about Buddhism. And so I welcome you to type those into the chat if that's something that is something you're familiar and comfortable with. That would be interesting for me to know. And then, so I'll be speaking for maybe about 45 minutes or so, sharing some information. We'll take a brief break, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So this current session is being recorded. So if there's something that you missed or you want to go back and review later, I believe you'll have the opportunity to do that on the OCBC YouTube channel. And then for those who are joining us on YouTube, thank you very much. And then we'll be stopping the recording after that sort of presentation portion, and we'll be having some open discussion and Q&A at that point. So I look forward to having some conversation and hearing some of your thoughts and perspectives at that time. So, as things come up during this portion where I'll be talking, again, feel free to type into the chat, and then we can go ahead. I guess I'll go ahead and begin my session here. So I want to begin by saying a little bit about what is a sutra. We talk about the different kinds of teachings that we have in Buddhism, and the word sutra is a word we use a lot. We often talk about sutra chanting as something that we do in our service. The word sutra itself means a thread, And the original kind of meaning of that, there's a couple of different explanations. One sort of etymology is that when the sutras were originally written down, which was maybe 500 years after the Buddha, that they would punch a hole. They would be written on leaves, and then they would punch a hole in the leaves and kind of string them together with a thread. The other explanation is that the sutra is the thread of the teaching, the kind of the narrative, the story, or the teaching that the Buddha provides a kind of thread that holds the meaning together. And so in an essential sense, the sutras are the words of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha. So in terms of the things that we read and study, the words of Shakyamuni Buddha. We also read and study words of Shindon Shonin and the seven masters and other teachers of our tradition. And so the sutras specifically, we could think of those as the Dharma talks that were delivered by the Buddha. And when you read a sutra, there's a kind of basic structure to it. They all begin with something like, "Thus I have heard," "Thus I have heard," and this is the explanation that the Buddha's disciple Ananda, the Buddha's close companion, was present for all of the teachings, or else he had a deal, an agreement with the Buddha. If he wasn't actually with him while he was teaching, the Buddha had agreed that if he went off somewhere and gave a teaching where Ananda wasn't there, then he would, when he returned, he would tell Ananda the content of that teaching. So Ananda was the keeper of the information, the knowledge. He had an incredible memory. And so all the sutras begin, "Thus I have heard," expressing the sense that Ananda heard this teaching from the Buddha, and then he's now going to share it with us. And then the sutras describe the scene. They set the scene. They would say the Buddha, or usually the world honored one, referring to the Buddha, was living at a certain place. And they will tell who all of the assembled monks and nuns, or the people who were gathered there to hear the teachings were. And then the sutra will have the narrative, the teaching that is provided. And so the Buddha's sutras, are, there's a tremendous collection, a vast number of sutras. In Chinese translation, the sutras fill up, like a bookcase, like this one behind me would be filled with all of the teachings of the Buddha, all of the sutras. And so it's important for a person who's on the path of the Dharma, studying the Buddha's teachings, to be able to identify which of those teachings really speak to oneself, and to study those deeply, to go into some depth, and to choose certain sutras. So in our Jodo Shinshu Pure Land tradition, we choose what we call the three Pure Land Sutras. And so the three Pure Land Sutras are the larger, we could talk about the larger sutra. That's where the Jusege and the Sambutsuge, which we often chant at our services, those come out of the larger sutra. That's the sutra that really tells in the most detail the story of this Buddha, Amida Buddha, who we revere. And when we say the words Namo Amida Butsu, we're saying, I take refuge in Amida Buddha. So we have the larger sutra, which really tells a kind of detailed explanation of Amida Buddha's life, and gives us a clear sense of what kind of Buddha Amida is. Then we have the Amida Sutra, which is much shorter. It's oftentimes called the shorter sutra or the smaller sutra. And that one we'll often chant in its entirety on special, for special services or memorial services. The Amida Sutra contains much of the same meaning as the larger sutra, but it's a little bit more condensed. And then we have the Contemplation Sutra, which is the sutra I'll be talking about today, which describes the contemplation on the Buddha's Pure Land. And I won't be getting into, in today's session, I won't be getting into great detail about the various contemplations that are described there. If we want to talk about that during the Q&A, I'm happy to to explore that topic. But what I want to talk about today is the first part, the setting of the Contemplation Sutra, because it's quite unique and different from many of the other sutras, and how this sutra, all of these sutras express something about Amida Buddha. The Contemplation Sutra gives a very clear picture of the compassion of the Buddha and how the Buddha's compassion might apply to our everyday relationships and experiences in our daily lives. And so the Contemplation Sutra begins with a kind of a tragic scene. It's often called the tragedy at Rajagriha. And so I'm going to share something on the screen here. Some of the words of the sutra. And then let's see, Reverend John, did you want to post the PDF in the chat, or would you like me to do that? Either way.
No, I'll do that right now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Reverend John. I appreciate that. So and then this is a handout I've prepared. I'm not going to be going through every sort of line by line in detail. I'm going to be referring to different parts of it, and then Reverend Turner will make this available to all of you in the chat. So then you can go back and refer to it. All of the passages and things that are quoted here in this handout come from two books, really. One is this one, the Three Pure Land Sutras, Volume 1. And this is available through, for example, the BCA bookstore. And this is the translation of the Contemplation Sutra and the Amida Sutra into English. So this is the translation that I'm using today. And then the other text is this one, the Collected Works of Shindon. And these are actually both available online as well. So if you'd like to track these down online, let me know, and I can share with you the links for those as well. But it's nice. I'm one who likes to actually have the physical book. Sometimes it's nice to actually be able to hold the book in your hand, especially the collected works, because you really get a sense of the weight of Shinran's study and his the depth of his his knowledge of the Dharma. And so I'll begin. Again, I won't read the entire section, but I want to read this first portion because it sort of sets the stage. And then I'll talk a little bit about the meaning here. Sutras, it's important when we read the sutras to keep in mind that they are translations from an Indian language, such as Sanskrit, into Chinese, and then into English. So it's something that it has been translated, at least twice before we're actually getting to read it. And so sometimes, the language, particularly these translations, the intention is to be very faithful to the meaning of the original. Sometimes the language is a little different from the way that we normally, speak and write. And so I'll try to also kind of unpack a little bit about what meaning we have here in these sutras. So this is the Contemplation Sutra. Begins, as I said, with "Thus I have heard." Thus I have heard, at one time the Buddha was staying on Vulture Peak in Rajagriha, together with a great multitude of 1,250 monks. There were also 32,000 bodhisattvas led by Manjushri, the Dharma prince. So this is kind of interesting. It's different from the other two Pure Land Sutras in that the other two Pure Land Sutras go through exhaustive lists of exactly who was there, this person, this person, this person, this person, who were present at the time that the Buddha gave the teaching. The Contemplation Sutra is a little different in that way, and we'll see why, because the main delivery of the teaching is not actually there in the company of all of the monks, but it's in a very different setting. And so I'll read this next section to give a sense of where it was that this teaching took place. At that time, in the great city of Rajagriha, there was a prince named Ajatasattu. Following the counsel of his wicked friend Devadatta, he seized his father, King Bimbasara, and confined him in a chamber with walls 7 layers deep, forbidding all court officials from entering. The queen, Vaidehi, was loyal to the king. Having cleansed herself by bathing, she spread a paste of ghee and honey mixed with flour on her body, filled her ornaments with the juice of grapes, and secretly offered them to the king. The king ate the flour paste, drank the juice, then asked for water to rinse his mouth. Having rinsed his mouth, he respectfully put his palms together, and facing Vulture Peak, he worshipped the world-honored one from afar and said, Mahamudgalyayana is my close friend. I beseech you, feel compassion towards me. Send him here to initiate me in the 8 precepts. Then Mahamudgalyayana flew as swift as a hawk or a falcon to the king. Day after day in this manner, Mahamudgalyayana initiated the king in the 8 precepts. The world-honored one also sent the venerable Purna to expound the Dharma to the king. 3 weeks passed in this manner, and because the king was able to eat the flour paste and hear the Dharma, his countenance was peaceful and content. Okay, so can you get a sense of what's happening here, right? So you have, there's a king, King Bimbasara, and his son, Prince Ajatasattu. Ajatasattu, he is friends with Devadatta. Devadatta is the Buddha's cousin. I think of Devadatta as like the Wile E. Coyote of the Buddha's teachings. He's always causing trouble. If he appears in a teaching or a sutra, it's like, oh man, what's he going to do next? He does things like, while the Buddha is walking, traveling between one town and another, Devadatta wishes to crush the Buddha, so he rolls a giant boulder down a hill onto the path where the Buddha's walking and almost crushes the Buddha, but the Buddha manages to jump out of the way just in time, but injures his foot in the process. Another occasion, the Buddha's visiting a market, and Devadatta, so he's always trying to kill the Buddha. And so the Buddha's visiting this market, and Devadatta, he does these like acts of terrorism. Basically, he gets an elephant and he gives it lots and lots of wine so that it gets really drunk. And then he kind of pokes it and harasses it, so it's enraged. It's like drunk and enraged. And then he lets it loose in the market where the Buddha is, thinking that, it's gonna trample the Buddha and smash the Buddha. And then in that moment, as the elephant is charging through the market, it said that the Buddha lets out this great call of an elephant that he had learned when he was practicing in the woods from spending time around elephants during his ascetic period. So he gives out this great call, and hearing this, the elephant is suddenly, kind of like awakened from its drunken rage. And then the Buddha goes and sort of, puts his hand on the elephant's, nose. The elephant very calmly sort of sits down and bows its head, in reverence before the peaceful and compassionate Buddha. So Devadatta is continually trying to destroy the Buddha and to take over the Sangha. So, I think about him as like, he's like the jealous cousin. And, before the Buddha was born, his parents, King Suddhodana and Queen Maya, they didn't have any children. And so, Devadatta, as one of the sons of the family, was in a sort of, he was in a very high status, and everyone sort of looked up to him and said, oh, Devadatta, maybe he's going to be one of our great leaders in the future. King Suddhodana doesn't have an heir, and so Devadatta kind of is growing up with this, and then his cousin Siddhartha is born, and so Devadatta then naturally he starts to feel this kind of this jealousy towards the Buddha. And we have stories from throughout their lives, even as a child, stories of the stories of Siddhartha as a child having these kind of conflicts with Devadatta. And so this inter-family conflict, plays kind of the underground or the background to this aspect of the Buddha's life and to the story of the Contemplation Sutra. So Devadatta gets this idea in his mind that, well, if you can take over the kingdom, then you will be king. So we get Bimbasara out of the way, then Ajatasattu, you become king, and then you and we can rule just as Bimbasara and Shakyamuni had been ruling. If you take over the kingdom, I can take over the Sangha, and then you and I can rise to power, and all of this respect and honor that the king and the Buddha had been receiving, that can all be ours. So he's sort of poisoning Ajatasattu's mind. And so Ajatasattu gets on board with this. So he captures his father and he throws him in jail. And then he says, okay, well, I'm not going to, strike him down with a sword or shoot him with a bow and arrow, but he's going to be in jail and he's to have no food or no water. No food or no water. And of course, he would naturally starve to death. However, the queen, his wife, Queen Vaidehi, is loyal and courageous. And so she takes a bath, she cleanses herself, and she puts on lots and lots of makeup. But her makeup is flour and ghee. Ghee is clarified butter. So she's, covered her body with, thick cake makeup, but it's flour and ghee. And then she fills her big, her big earrings and her necklaces and her jewelry, has these kind of little, almost like little cups. And so she fills those up with grape juice, right? And goes in to visit the king every day. Now, as the queen, the guards can't stop her from going in. So as she goes in, she's also providing nourishment for the king. So he's not starving. So he's being physically nourished. And then he's calling to the Buddha. He's calling out to the Buddha, send Mahamudgalyayana. Mahamudgalyayana may be familiar from the Obon story because he has tremendous powers as an enlightened being. He can see throughout the 6 realms of birth and death. And that's what comes up in that Obon story. But he's also able to travel instantly to wherever he is needed to share the Dharma. And so King Bimbasara, aware of this, says, send Mahamudgalyayana to come and teach me, because he can come even through the walls of this prison. He can come to provide the Dharma for me. And so then Mahamudgalyayana appears, swift as a hawk. He's there, and he's there to initiate him in the precepts, to help the king to have his life settled on the Buddhist path. And the world-honored one, the Buddha, also sends the Venerable Purna. Purna is among the Buddha's disciples known to be the most skillful in teaching the Dharma. So he's getting the best Dharma talks. So even though he's locked in jail, he's very much at peace and content, right? Quite the opposite of what Ajatasattu had intended for him. Okay. So then Ajatasattu questioned the guard. Is my father still alive? The guard replied, Your Majesty, the queen spreads flour paste on her body, fills her ornaments with juice, and offers them to the king. The monks Mahamodgalyayana and Purna come through the air to expound the Dharma to him. It is impossible to stop them. So Ajatasattu is like, oh, how's my dad doing? Thinking the guards are going to say, oh, we're sorry, but he's passed away. But lo and behold, his father is doing quite well. And so Ajatasattu, disappointed then, upon hearing these words, Ajatasattu became infuriated at his mother and shouted, Mother, you are my enemy because you are an accomplice of my enemy. Those evil monks with their delusive magic have enabled that wicked king to remain alive for these many days. Immediately, he drew his sharp sword, intending to kill her, right? So he flies into a rage, he pulls out his sword, and he's about to attack his own mother. At that moment, a wise and intelligent minister named Chandraprabha, along with Jivaka, bowed to the king and said, Your Majesty, we ministers have heard, as taught in the Vedic scriptures, that since the beginning of the cosmic period, there have been 18,000 wicked kings who have murdered their fathers out of lust to usurp the throne. Yet never have we heard of anyone who has committed the outrage of killing his mother. Your Majesty, if you should dare commit such an outrageous act, you would bring disgrace upon the Kshatriya class. As your ministers, we could not bear to hear of it, for it would be an act of a Chandala, and we could no longer remain here. Then the two ministers, after stating these words, grasped their swords and stepped back. Right. So Ajatasattu is ready to kill his own mother. And at that moment, his two trusted advisors, the people who he would need in order to be able to run the kingdom, right? He's never been king. He's just been the prince. He's trying to take over. He's basically trying to stage a coup. And if he's actually going to run the kingdom, he needs the support and guidance of Chandraprabha and Jivaka. And so when they see him doing this, they realize, that he's just going too far. And they say, well, there's precedent for what you've done up to this point. Not that they necessarily approve of it, but they're like, these things happen. This is, historically this has happened, but there's never been someone who murdered his own mother. This is, this would be a step too far. If you do this, we're going to quit. And, good luck running the kingdom on your own. And at that point, they say something here. They say, we could not bear it. It would be an act of a Chandala. And so the Chandala is, these are like the outcasts, the people who are outside of the Indian society. And this specific passage in modern times has been sort of questioned and examined. And, we can have a conversation about, during the discussion, if you're interested in exploring more about this, the issues of discrimination in class and how this sutra has, historically served to perpetuate discrimination against people throughout Asian cultures and in Japan as well. But I'm going to sort of put that out there. I'm going to bracket that, and we can definitely explore that more in the discussion if that's something you're interested in exploring more. But at this point, I want to emphasize that this wickedness, I guess we might say, described here of Ajatasattu, that he's going to the point where he's ready to kill his own mother to achieve his aims, and not even that he needs to kill her to get his goal, but he's just so enraged, he's just so angry that she's thwarting his plan, that he's ready to kill her. So he's filled with rage. So reading this sutra, we really get a powerful picture of greed, anger, ignorance, the three poisons expressed in this world that we live in. And as the introductory passage for the sutra, it's very profound because it's such a contrast from many of the other sutras that we have that describe life in the Sangha, where it is harmonious and everyone is living according to the rules set forth for the Buddha for practice. The larger sutra, for example, is a conversation between the Buddha and his disciple Ananda. It's very respectful and very much within this sort of dignified character of the Buddha himself. In the Contemplation Sutra, it begins by describing like the worst of society. This to me just resonates with stuff we're going on, going through in our society at the moment. People, struggling to take power, struggling to maintain power. All of these issues that were present 2,500 years ago in the time of the Buddha, still present in our world today. So as we read these words of the Contemplation Sutra, we really get resonance. I get resonance with this world that I find myself living in. Conflict within families, lust for power, greed, anger, people harming one another. And so this is the context. This sets the context for this specific teaching of the Buddha. This tells us that this sutra is a place where we can look for guidance on how the Buddha understood these issues and what is the compassionate teaching that the Buddha provides in response. Then we have this section. Ajatasattu, startled and frightened, called out to Jivaka, "Aren't you my friend?" Jivaka replied, my majesty, please restrain yourself and do not kill your mother." Having heard these words, the king repented and begged for their mercy. So he discarded his sword and gave up his intention of killing his mother. Instead, he ordered the guards of the inner court to lock her up within the depths of the palace and not allow her to come out again. So Jivaka is a very significant figure in this sutra and in this story of Ajatasattu and King Bimbasara, which appears in other sutras as well. Jivaka is described as a doctor, a good doctor, as also the Buddha is also considered to be described as a doctor. And so one who recognizes the ailments of others and then is able to prescribe medicine or a cure for those ailments. And so Jivaka is very perceptive into the nature of human suffering, but also appears in the sutra and in other sutras as the one who's guiding Prince Ajatasattu from the illness of his greed, anger, and ignorance to we could say the spiritual health of awakening. And so Jivaka succeeds in this moment in convincing Ajatasattu not to kill his own mother, and Ajatasattu instead throws his mother in jail, right? So he's not gonna let her get off. He's not going to fully repent, but he's going to sort of take a step back, and then he imprisons his own mother. And so this sets kind of the stage for Vaidehi is the main interlocutor or the main conversation partner for the Buddha in this sutra. And this is interesting because most of the sutras, not all, but many of the sutras, the Buddha's main person that he's talking to is either one of the other disciples, such as Ananda, in the case of the larger sutra, Shariputra in the case of the Amida Sutra, or bodhisattvas, like the Vimalakirti Sutra, the Buddha's, talking with Bodhisattva Manjushri. In the larger sutra, he's also talking to Maitreya Bodhisattva. So oftentimes the people to whom the Buddha is delivering the teachings are on the path. They're in the monastic practice. In many cases, they're already awakened themselves. So Vaidehi is someone who's really immersed in this everyday life. She is kind of an ordinary, unenlightened being. And she's in a really difficult spot. And so she asks the Buddha for help. And so to me, this teaching is so significant because it's one we can look to when we find ourselves in these cases where we've been harmed, where we've experienced injustice, where we've experienced, maybe some being treated, very, very unfairly, very wrongfully. We can look to this teaching for guidance, and shows the Buddha's compassion for those who suffer, and how we can view and understand everyone involved in the situation. And so, I'll read a little further here in this section from the Contemplation Sutra. Then Vaidehi, having been confined, became emaciated with grief and despair. Facing Vulture Peak from afar, she bowed to the Buddha and uttered the following words: Tathagata, world-honored one, in the past you used to send Ananda to come and console me. I am now filled with anguish. World-honored one, you are majestic and exalted, and so in no way shall I be able to see you. I beseech you, send Mahamodgalyayana and the Venerable Ananda to come and see me. So like her husband, then she's thrown in jail. She's very upset. She's very distraught. And she asks the Buddha, please send your disciples. Please send Mahamodgalyayana, again, who can pass freely into all spaces to teach the Dharma, and Ananda, who was particularly compassionate and supportive of women seekers of the Dharma. He was one of the great advocates for the formation of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the Sangha of nuns, and he often would share the Dharma teaching with women and with communities of women. So she asks, please send your disciples to come in and teach me. And then this next part is very interesting. When she had said these words, she wept in grief, shedding tears like a shower of rain. Then she bowed towards the Buddha in the distance. Even before she raised her head, the world-honored one, who is staying on Vulture Peak, having known the thoughts in Vaidehi's mind, immediately ordered Mahamodgalyayana and Ananda to go to her through the air. The Buddha himself disappeared from Vulture Peak and appeared in the royal palace. When Vaidehi raised her head after bowing, she saw before her Shakyamuni Buddha, the world-honored one, whose body was the color of purple gold, sitting on a lotus flower made up of 100 kinds of jewels. Attending him on his left was Mahamodgalyayana, and on his right was Ananda. Shakra, Brahma, and the guardian devas of the world hovered in the sky, scattering everywhere celestial flowers like rain as an offering. And so she bows down and beseeches the Buddha, please send your disciples to come and teach me. And then when she raises her head, the Buddha himself has appeared there with Ananda, with Mahamodgalyayana, and with all of these kind of celestial beings. So we see that the Buddha responds immediately to her suffering. And not only does he send his disciples, but he sees that in her grief, in her feelings of distraught and suffering, that he needs to go directly. This is an opportunity for him to go directly. She is ready to hear the teaching. She's at a point in her life where her heart opens to the Dharma. And I think oftentimes for us, as we go through our daily lives and everything is kind of hunky-dory, we don't necessarily have that feeling of urgency of seeking. And in many cases, it's when we're faced with crisis and struggle that we're ready, that our heart is open, that we've exhausted all of the potential within ourselves to come up with solutions and solve the problems. And it's in those moments that we're willing to look to the teachings, that we're ready to receive that wise teaching presented by the Buddha. And so, and here she laments before the Buddha. When Vaidehi saw the Buddha, the world-honored one, she tore off her ornaments, prostrated herself on the ground, and cried bitterly before the Buddha. World-honored one, she said, what evils did I commit in the past that I should have such a wicked son? Also, world-honored one, what karmic relations would have caused you to become a relative of Devadatta? Right. So she's so miserable, and it's interesting because she's first she's like, what did I do to deserve this? It's basically what she's saying. What did I do to deserve this? How could I possibly have done something so bad that I would deserve to have a son who is intent on killing his own father, and who's going to try to kill his mother and then throw her in jail? And then also, how could this scumbag Devadatta be a relative of yours? How, like, what is, she's like, how, I can't understand these connections. How is it that people who are, who are good and who are not harming others, can be related to these horrible and wicked people? So she's lamenting kind of this state of the world and this difficulty of our relationships. And then at this point, then she asks the Buddha, she has a request for the Buddha. She says, I beseech you, world-honored one, please explain to me in detail a place that is free of sorrows and afflictions. I wish to be born there. I do not wish to live in this defiled world of Jambudvipa, which is filled with beings in hell, hungry spirits and animals, and where there are many vile beings. I wish that henceforth I may hear no evil words and may see no evil people. Now, world-honored one, I prostrate myself before you and beg you in repentance to take pity on me. For what I truly desire, son like Buddha, is that you teach me how to visualize a place perfected by pure and undefiled acts. So she's here, she is she's longing for this world that's free of suffering. So there's two aspects to this. On one side, there's this deep awareness of the suffering of this world that we live in, and a wish to be free of that suffering, a longing for a world of peace and bliss. So having experienced and being aware of the suffering of this world, then she longs for a world that's free from wickedness and harmfulness, a world of peace and compassion. And so, and then here, and I'm going to paraphrase this next section. So then the Buddha sends forth this brilliant light, and he makes appear before her all of these countless Buddha lands. He shows her all of these different Buddha lands, and they're beautiful and they're wonderful and they're glorious and magnificent. So he appears, he shows her using his amazing, tremendous powers as an enlightened Buddha. He lets her see into all of these worlds. And then she says to him, then Vaidehi said to the Buddha, world-honored one, these various Buddha lands are pure and free of defilement, and all of them are radiant. I, however, wish to be born in the world of perfect bliss of Amida Buddha. I beseech you, world-honored one, teach me how to concentrate my thoughts and teach me how to attain right perception. So he's shown her all of these different Buddha lands, all of these different worlds. And she says specifically, there is one that I wish to see, the Pure Land of Amida Buddha. So she's asking specifically for teachings on the Pure Land of Amida Buddha. So he hasn't shown her that world, he's just shown her all of these other Buddha lands, but she knows, no, the Pure Land of Amida Buddha, that's the one for me. That's the one that I wish to be able to see. And so at that moment, the world honored one smiled, and from the Buddha's mouth emitted 5 colored rays of light, each shining on Bimbasara's head. Although the great king was in confinement, with his unhindered mind's eye, he could see the world-honored one in the distance. As he touched his forehead to the ground in homage, he spontaneously made progress and reached the stage of non-retrogression, stage of a non-returner. And so here then the Buddha's compassion, this extends, and he then in that moment, through Vaidehi's request, then King Bimbasara is able to realize the stage of a non-returner. The Buddha brings about King Bimbasara's certitude that he will certainly be awakened. Then the world-honored one said to Vaidehi, "Do you know that Amida Buddha is not far from here? You should concentrate your thoughts and clearly visualize the one in that land who has already accomplished the pure deeds. I shall now describe to you in detail various images of that land, so that all ordinary people in the future who desire to perform pure acts may attain birth in the land of bliss in the Western quarter." And so then at this point, the Buddha begins the teaching about Amida Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha begins to tell Vaidehi in detail how she may visualize and to see the world of Amida Buddha. And so this is why it's called the Contemplation Sutra, because what follows is a series of meditative practices that can be done to kind of paint a picture in one's mind of the world of Amida Buddha, and then through that to encounter Amida Buddha and to receive a sense of that world of peace and bliss. But it describes these different meditative practices that one can do, but it also describes, there's a section on non-meditative practices at the end, where the various beings are kind of ranked and classified according to the best of the best, all the way down to the kind of mediocre people to the worst of the worst. So it starts out by describing people who observe the various Buddhist precepts, who just live really exemplary, fantastic, good lives, and then goes on to describe people who they're pretty good. They're nice people. They do nice things for other people. They don't cause any trouble. Those people are, they're kind of in the middle. And then it goes on to describe wicked and bad people. And so think about this whole sort of description is the Buddha's response to Vaidehi's question. He's saying, yeah, there are really great people out there, and there are ways that they can, enter into this world of Amida Buddha. But he also describes how wicked people like Devadatta, people like Ajatasattu also are the object of the Buddha's compassion. So I want to read this section on the lowest of the low. So those who attain birth in the lowest grade of the lowest rank are as follows. Suppose there are sentient beings who commit such evils as the 5 grave offenses and the 10 transgressions, thus burdened with all kinds of evil. Such a foolish person, because of his evil deeds, is destined to fall into evil realms, where he transmigrates for many kalpas and suffers agonies endlessly. So the 5 grave offenses are to kill one's mother, to kill one's father, to kill an enlightened disciple of the Buddha called an arhat, to cause blood to flow from the body of the Buddha, and to create discord among the Sangha. So these are all the things, like between Devadatta and Ajatasattu, they basically got these 5 bases covered. They've done all of these things. And so, and that's sort of the underpinning. Vaidehi is like, why are there such scumbags in the world? I just want to be away from them. I want to be free from them. And here the Buddha is saying, yes, there are these really horrible, terrible people out there. And then he says, when this person is about to die, he may meet a true teacher who consoles him in various ways, and preaching the wondrous Dharma advises him to be mindful of the Buddha. So mindfulness of the Buddha, that's Nembutsu. Nen means mindfulness, Buddha is Butsu, so Nembutsu, advising him to practice Nembutsu, to be mindful of the Buddha. But he is too severely tormented by pain to do so. So he can't meditate on the Buddha. He's too miserable. Then his good friend says to him, if you cannot concentrate your thought on the Buddha, you should simply recite the name of the Buddha of immeasurable life. Accordingly, he sincerely and continually says, Namo Amida Butsu, 10 times. Because he recites the name of the Buddha with each recitation, his evil karma binding him to birth and death for 80 kotis of kalpas is eliminated. When he dies, he sees a golden lotus flower appear before him, shining like the sun. At that instant, he is born in the world of perfect bliss. And so this section, this is where the Contemplation Sutra, this is where the words Namo Amida Butsu come from. They don't appear in the Amida Sutra. They don't appear in the larger sutra. The words Namo Amida Butsu only appears here in the Contemplation Sutra. And this is where it says, say Namo Amida Butsu. So our practice of saying Namo Amida Butsu, or our Nembutsu practice, comes from this teaching. Now, the way that Shindon understands and appreciates this teaching is that this passage right here, this is the whole point of the Contemplation Sutra. That the Contemplation Sutra is really intended to describe how evil, wicked people are able to realize liberation, birth in the Pure Land of Amida Buddha. This passage describes that everyone is included and no one is excluded. And so we have this kind of context of this horrible things that Ajatasattu is doing. And, people read that and you have like an emotional response, like, yeah, how could he be so terrible? And then the Buddha concludes the teaching by saying, this compassion of Amida Buddha that Vaidehi is longing for, that this includes to everyone, including Ajatasattu, including Devadatta. Even the most wicked are embraced in the compassion of Amida Buddha. And so I want to, so this is kind of the sutra section. So these are the sections I want to introduce from the sutra. And then I want to talk a little bit about how Shindon Shonin appreciates this. And I'm going to, in the collected works of Shindon, in the Kyogyo Shinsho, or the True Teaching, Practice, and Realization, Shindon quotes extensively from the Nirvana Sutra, sections that describe these same events and provide more details and more context. I'm in the interest of time, I won't get into those now. We can talk about that again in the discussion time if you wish. But I just want to read a section from Shindon's understanding and appreciation of these events. And this is the opening words of the Kyogyo Shinsho. And I'm kind of scrolling somewhat gently through here as to not give folks whiplash on this handout here. So these are the words of Shindon Shonin. And I'm going to read this, and then we'll kind of conclude this section, this portion of the gathering. These are, again, this is the opening passages of the Kyogyo Shinsho from the preface. I reflect within myself, the universal vow to fathom is indeed a great vessel bearing us across the ocean difficult to cross. The unhindered light is the sun of wisdom, dispersing the darkness of our ignorance. Thus it is that when conditions for the teaching of birth in the Pure Land had matured, Devadatta provoked Ajatasattu to commit grave crimes. And when the opportunity arose for explaining the pure act by which birth is settled, Shakyamuni led Vaidehi to select the land of peace. In their selfless love, these incarnated ones Devadatta, Ajatasattu, Vaidehi, all aspired to save multitudes of beings from pain and affliction. And in his compassion, Shakyamuni, the great hero, sought indeed to bless those committing the 5 grave offenses, those slandering the Dharma, and those lacking the seed of Buddhahood. We know, therefore, that the auspicious name embodying the perfectly fulfilled supreme virtues is the true wisdom that transforms our evil into virtue, that the diamond-like Shinjin, so difficult to accept, is true reality that sweeps away doubt and brings us to attainment of enlightenment. So this is really remarkable here. So what Shinran Shonin is saying is that Devadatta, Ajatasattu, Vaidehi, they're all incarnated bodhisattvas. They're all awakened beings who've come into this world simply to set the stage for the teaching of the Nembutsu, the teaching of this auspicious name, the saying of Namo Amida Butsu. So all of this wickedness, all of these terrible things that are happening in this sutra, from Shinran's perspective, all of this is something to be grateful for, because it provides the context for us to hear this Nembutsu teaching. It provides the clear teaching that people who are wicked, harmful, and foolish are embraced by the compassion of Amida Buddha, and that they need only to entrust themselves to the working of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, and say the name to realize liberation from this world of suffering, this world of greed, anger, and ignorance, and to enter into the Buddha's world of compassion, the Pure Land of peace and bliss. And so, this teaching, this Contemplation Sutra, is an expression of the Buddha's compassion for this world. And all of this dramatic kind of wickedness and harmfulness that we hear, this is provided to resonate with our own lives. And this is Shinran Shonin's way of appreciating this teaching. And it's interesting, when Shinran Shonin talks about himself, when he reflects on this story, he doesn't identify with with the good and the virtuous. Rather, he says that wickedness, that's in me. So this isn't a teaching for Ajatasattu only. This is a teaching for me. When Shinran Shonin reads the story of Ajatasattu, he hears that in himself. And so this teaching, the Contemplation Sutra, is a kind of a mirror of our own lives, and our way of appreciating the working of the Buddha's compassion, and the Buddha's compassionate response to the conflict that we experience in our lives, this world of injustice, suffering, and difficulty. And if we can view our lives through this lens of compassion and the Nembutsu, then our way of relating even to those who cause trouble and bring suffering into our lives can also be transformed by the Buddha's compassion. So I'd like to kind of conclude this section here, and then we'll stop the recording and take a little break. Why don't we do a gassho here for those who are going to be joining on YouTube later, so they can have their closing gassho as well. Please join me in gassho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.